Again, hi everyone. Thank you for joining RPRA this morning for our consultation webinar, where we will be reviewing the draft Batteries and ITT AV supply data verification procedure. My name is Michelle Hoover, and I am one of the communications advisors at RPRA, and will be your moderator for today's webinar. My colleagues, Ryan McAfee, who is our compliance manager of inspections, and Jonathan Peng, who is one of our senior registry and compliance officers, will be hosting today's webinar and will introduce themselves in just a moment. Next slide, please. So before we begin, we're just going to go over some housekeeping items just so we're all aware of how to use the platform. So we will be answering questions throughout the webinar, and please ask questions that are tailored to this procedure specifically. If you have questions not related to this procedure, you can always contact our compliance and registry team at registry@rpra.ca. To ask a question, click on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen and type in your question and click send. There's also an upvote feature that allows you to bump up someone else's question to the top of our queue. And this can be valuable if you want to ask the same question or if you are interested in hearing the answer to that question. If you are experiencing technical issues, please let us know by using the chat function and we will do our best to support you. If we are running short on time and can't answer your question today, someone from our compliance and registry team will follow up with you afterward. And this webinar is being recorded, and we will upload this afternoon our consultation slides as well as the recording, so you can review the slides before submitting feedback to us. Next slide, please. Okay, so our agenda. So for today, we will be reviewing the purpose of this consultation, why we're all here, including the purpose of phase 1, which was from September 9th until October 9th, 2021, and the purpose of phase 2, which began January 10th, last Monday, and it ends February 18th. We'll also be reviewing the timeline we are following for updating the procedure itself. We will then provide some background context on the procedure and the feedback received during phase 1 and how we implemented that. And then we'll review the proposed draft procedure. And finally, we will provide the next steps of this consultation. So now I will hand it over to Ryan.
Good morning, everyone. Michelle, thank you for that introduction. Yes, my name is Ryan McAfee, RPRA's Manager of Inspections, returning for phase 2 of the consultation. Let me start by saying, thank you to those of you who joined us at an earlier stage of this consultation process and for providing your feedback. On a personal note, it's always a lot better to be regulating a sector that is engaged, and I can say that based on the feedback, I can see that there is a lot of engagement and there's a lot of interest in the sector to make sure that this project is a success. So thank you to those of you who have provided your feedback already. You'll see as we go on how all of these pieces have fit together to create our latest draft procedure. And also let me say, welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time. As you'll see, there are still opportunities to participate in the consultation process now. We have a lot of content to get through today, so why don't we move on to the next slide, please? And we'll start with the purpose of the consultation. I'd like to take a minute to say that it's worthwhile to reiterate a few thoughts from our last session about why we've proposed to combine the batteries and ITT AV procedures. So I'd like to say that, first of all, these two procedures have very similar requirements when it comes to reporting and calculating management obligations. And I'm sure it'll be no surprise to anyone on this call that in our work, we've noticed that batteries and electronics are often supplied together by producers. So our view initially was that a combined approach may help to reduce complexity for producers who have obligations under both regulations. And based on your feedback, and so sounds like there was agreement with that. So last time we met for the launch of our public phase 1 consultation, we discussed verifiers. what the term meant, who should be included in the definition of a verifier, whether our view of combining batteries and ATT-AV procedures made practical sense to the sector. We proposed a few approaches to verifying compliance that we wanted, frankly, the sector to weigh in on. And we spent some time talking about what sampling methodologies should include. Today, as we dig into the second phase of the consultation, we'll be reviewing components of the draft batteries and ITT AV procedures that are being updated to include your feedback. We'll also respond to your questions, and we may have some questions to put to you as well as we move on, particularly based on questions that you asked during the webinar today. If we're not able to answer your question, we will certainly give it some thought and get back to you down the road. We'd also like to highlight how you can stay engaged in the consultation process and continue to be heard. And Michelle will have some guidance for you later on in the presentation on your engagement. So next slide, please. Great. Our objective is to ensure producers are able to meet various requirements under the regulations in the context of Ontario's approach to modern regulations. So practically, what that means is that the accuracy and completeness of the data submitted to the authority is always top of mind for several reasons, including making sure producers are aware of what's expected of them in terms of the upcoming year and management requirements that will flow to the upcoming year. As well as providing clear guidance to producers to support consistent data verification. And as a modern regulator, our policy development always considers cost effectiveness, efficiency of procedures, and ensuring a level playing field for the regulated community. Next slide, please. The timeline. So here we are on January 18th, holding our second webinar. So in the second half of the slide there. After today, you'll have a month to consider what it is that you've heard here today during the webinar, and you'll have an additional chance to review the posted draft procedure on our website and to provide some additional feedback to us. And then in March, we'll post the final draft of the procedures on our website. There's a note at the bottom of the page that I'd like to emphasize as well, and that's that you'll see that the deadline to submit supply data this year is June 30th and not April 30th. And I'll talk about that more in the next slide or 2 slides from now. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. Background. Let's spend some time talking about this. So supply data reporting requirements. Accurate annual supply data reporting is important because it's the input to determine what your management obligations will be in the following year. So beginning this year in 2022, producers will need to submit a verification report to verify the supply data that they're reporting to the authority. And to achieve this, do remember that it's important to work with a qualified person to complete the verification report in order to ensure the accuracy of the supply data being reported. Now, under the Batteries and ITT AV regulations, the supply reporting deadline is April 30th of each year. However, this year, as the regulator responsible for enforcing these regulations, the authority is giving producers until June 30th to submit their 2022 reports. Next slide, please. Good. So let's talk about the supply data verification requirements for 2022. So starting this year, verifications will be required for battery supply data, including the weight of single-use batteries supplied in 2021, the weight of rechargeable batteries supplied in 2020, as well as the weight of any post-consumer recycled content contained in either single-use or rechargeable batteries. And moving on to ITT AV, verifications will be required for supply data, including the weight of ITT AV supplied in 2020, and if applicable, management reductions. So that's for any post-consumer recycled content, warranties, or reductions in connection with repair options. I'd like to highlight a couple notes before we move on to the next slide. And that's that we're talking about verification reports. Let me clarify that any supply data that's already being reported to us before 2022, these data do not require an additional verification report to be submitted. And something that I mentioned last time that I think bears repeating, something to keep in mind when it comes to working collaboratively with us is that when it comes to any submissions made to the authority, producers are always expected to provide complete and accurate information. And whether it flows from these regulations or other regulations, should an inspection be initiated, an inspector may review additional data and request that producers explain how they arrived at their reported supply values through the inspection process. Now, if we can move on to the next slide, please. The feedback section. Yes, so we did receive feedback from the sector since our last consultation. I'm just going to move a couple windows around here. Please bear with me. There we go. Okay, so let's begin with the procedure section dealing with definitions. So the first piece of feedback that we requested from you was actually this question. We asked, the authority is seeking feedback on a definition of a verifier to include in the supply data verification procedure. Are there any persons who should be added or removed from the list of an acceptable verifier? Now, you'll see the list below is a little shorter than the list that we presented during the phase 1 consultation. That's because since we last met, we learned that 3 categories of regulated financial professionals were actually merged into one CPA designation. So that's why the list is shorter. But based on your feedback, we know that there is support for RPRA's proposed list. So the list that you see here on this slide is the list that you will see in the draft procedure in the category or under the definition of verifier. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, moving on to the introduction section of the procedure. The question that we put to you last time was, do you support the authority's recommendation to proceed with option 2, a combined batteries and ITT AV procedure, and then keeping the tire procedures separate? And indeed, there was support from the community for this. I will note that there was a substantive submission from a producer who put time and energy into writing an argument for a different procedure that we did take time in considering, and I'm grateful for the thought and care that was put into that submission. And it sounds like we're on the same page as a sector when it comes to option 2. Next slide, please. Okay, and this feedback flows from the reporting requirements section of the procedure. The question we put to you last time was, do you support the authority's proposal that all batteries and ITT AV producers submit a one-time supply data verification report in 2022? And yes, there was support for this, that all producers submit a verification report regardless of size in 2022. I'll speak about this a bit more in a second, but I'd like to speak to this in combination with the next slide. So if we can have the next slide up, please. The application and review component of the procedure, we asked you which option to separate producers into different categories do you prefer? And there was support for option 2, having only 2 categories, not moving to a 3-category model with an intermediary medium producer strata. Instead, just 2 strata that would be a large producers and small producer requirements. And the reason that that the previous slide and this slide align in my thinking is that it's the data from the verification report that I mentioned in the last slide that will inform which category of producer the sector will fall into based on weight. So by completing that verification report, we'll know whether producers should be assigned to one category or the other. And that assignment process is something that we will consult with you about again later on this year. And I believe there's one more slide for feedback. Yes. So this section deals with the sampling methodology, which can be found in the appendices of the draft procedure document posted on the website. The question that we put to you last time was, what level of confidence do you think is acceptable to ensure the accuracy of supply data? And there is support to move forward with a 95% confidence level. There is not good support for 99 or 90%, but 95% is where we've landed for the draft, and you will see that as well posted in the procedure. So I think this brings us to the end of the first section. I'll welcome my colleagues to turn their cameras back on. And there we are. And Michelle, do we have any questions?
We have one question, but I'm going to hold it until later in the presentation for when Jonathan's speaking. But for now, do we have any questions relating to the timeline that Ryan reviewed, or the background information, or the purpose of the consultation? Getting questions right now. One of them I will save until further in the webinar. One we can probably address now.
Sure.
How will large versus the rest be defined? And Ryan, I'll let you answer that one, because that refers to a future consultation that you already reviewed.
Sure. Yes. So once we receive the verification reports for 2022 for this year, we'll have a better sense of the weight that producers are obligated for or have been managing across the province. With those data, we'll be able to inform a consultation with the sector down the road. So you have our commitment that we'll engage with you in order to decide what that assignment would look like practically. Maybe I'll say that in a different way. It'll be based on weight, and until we have that data, we won't know what the what weight cutoffs that we should recommend to the sector for consultation. So that is something that you will have a chance to weigh in on. I did not intend to make that joke.
Thank you, Ryan. Let's go ahead and answer this other question. So someone's asking which transactions are verified, worldwide, Canada, or Ontario?
I will leave that to Jonathan.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah. So the data, supply data we're interested in is the Ontario supply data. In the verification procedure, we do ask the verifier to look at the raw sales report and compare it to the Ontario supply report to look at the variances. But this is just to make sure that all the Ontario supply data is included in the procedure. So short answer is the Ontario transactions are the ones we're looking for.
Thank you, Jonathan. And then we have a question asking if the verifier needs to be external or an internal employee.
It's a good question. So so long as the verifier meets the requirements that we've posted a few slides previously, that they're competent to be a verifier. The caveat being, of course, that the person verifying data can't be the same person who's collecting and coming to conclusions. Think about the verifier as the person who is verifying the report before it's submitted to the authority and verifying data. I imagine that what we'll see once the dust settles in this and reporting is active is that depending on the size of an organization, it may be a senior auditor or a controller in the organization that fits the definition of a verifier, meaning that they have the designations that would be doing that. I imagine some other organizations who perhaps don't have as many financial that don't have as many employees, frankly, may wish to contract out this function, but it's not a requirement of the regulation.
Thank you. And then I'm going to ask one last question, which we covered under the background section, I believe. So If we are currently exempted due to not meeting weight requirements, will we need to submit a verification report for 2022?
Yeah, we'll take this one. So on the draft procedure, we mentioned at the beginning, the verification procedure will apply to the registered battery and ITTAV producers. If you're a ITTAV producer and your minimum management requirement is below 3.5 tons, you're exempt from registration and reporting. You won't be required to follow this procedure. As a matter of fact, you don't even have to register and report. For battery producers, for rechargeable battery, if you are less than if your minimum management requirement is less than 1.5 tons, or if you're a single-use battery producer, your minimum management requirement is less than 2.5 tons, and you have less than 5 full-time employee, you will be exempt from registering and reporting. Then you don't have to submit this verification report, and you don't even have to register with us. So if you're exempt completely from the regulation, you don't have to follow this procedure.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm just going to go ahead and ask the last question because I think it does relate to that, but I want to make sure we do answer Chris's question. So how does the sales data verification apply if a producer is below the threshold for responsibility? Example, if a company is required to manage electronics but does not sell enough batteries to fall under the battery program, would batteries also have to be verified?
Right. So one thing I want to mention, the definition, the weight of the electronics does include the weight of battery embedded in the ITTAV product. However, if the replacement batteries are, if you are below the threshold, like I mentioned before, if you're below 1.5 for rechargeable, 2.5 for single use, you will be exempt from management and collection, but you are still required to register because you have more than 5 employees. In this particular situation, you will still be subject to this procedure because you have obligation to register report. But if you have less than 5 employees and you're also below the threshold I mentioned for rechargeable and single use, you will be exempt from registration and reporting. And you for batteries, and you don't have to do this procedure for your battery supply.
Thank you. So let's move on. We've answered all the questions so far.
Perfect. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for Ryan. I'm going to take you through the rest of this webinar, which consists of 3 sections. I will first go through the verification steps for the supply data before the management reduction. Then I'm going to talk about the verification step for the management reduction. At the end, I will demonstrate how to use the sample size chart in Appendix A with one of the proposed procedure. So let's look at the verification step for battery or ITTAV supply data. The first verification step here is to ask the verifier to document a bunch of questions to gain an understanding of the reporting process. Question like, what is the producer marketing process, including how products are marketed in Ontario? So for example, obligated ITTAV or batteries can be marketed by the retail store or online, or they can even order through phones. So all the supply data need to be considered when the verifier look at the total Ontario supply data. Second question, how are product marketing in Ontario tracked separately from product supply in other province? So one simple example, and normally the final destination of where the product end up will be tracked on the sales records, and that's can be used by the verifier to identify the Ontario supply versus supply to other province. Third question, how is a SKU or a stock keeping unit set up in the producer's ERP database system, and what product specifications are included? Information such as the product dimensions, the weight of the product, the brand names sometimes are tracked in the ERP or database system. So all that information will help the verifier to identify a obligated product versus a non-obligated product. The fourth question, what are the producer's obligation based on the definition of a producer? One example is if a business is producer because they're the first importer of a obligated product from out of Ontario into Ontario with no brand name residence in Canada, then that producer will be obligated for the product that they import into Ontario. Other question will help the verifier to gain understanding include what are the brand names of the product for which the producer has the collection and resource recovery obligations for. Next slide. What is the producer's methodology to determine how product was supplied in Ontario? What is the producer's step-by-step process for preparing the product supply report, including what system or applications are used to track product supply and what reports are used? What is the producer's methodology for determining the weight of the product supply into Ontario? Again, there are two methodologies. A producer can use the actual weight or the weight conversion factor. How does the producer determine which products are included in the product supply report and which ones, if any, are excluded based on the definition of battery and e-regulation? So all this question hopefully will help the verifier to understand the reporting process and will help him or her in a good position to carry out the rest of the verification steps. Next slide, please. The second verification step, we asked the verifier to select a sample of obligated SKU in accordance with Appendix A and perform the following for each. Like I mentioned, if the actual weight is used, the verifier is expected to agree to the manufacturer specifications. If the calculated weight is used, the verifier is expected to compare the calculation to the weight conversion factor in Appendix C, which is the battery weight conversion factor, or Appendix C for ITTAV weight conversion factor, to determine if the product were reported in the correct category and if the weight conversion factors are applied correctly. The third verification steps is to validate the accuracy of the product unit report. There are two methods can be used. If the actual number of units is used, then the verifier is expected to agree to the producer's sales record to validate the total unit reported. If the calculated number of units is used, then agree to the Ontario population to the most recent Statistic Canada official census, agree to the population of each province and the territory in Canada in which the producer sells battery or ITTAV to the most recent Status Canada official census, and recalculate the number of Ontario unit supplied based on Appendix C. Next slide, please. Step number 4, select a sample of non-obligated SKU in accordance with Appendix A. For each sample selected, verify that they do not meet the definition of battery or ITTAV as applicable based on the SKU selected. Verification step number 5, confirm the accuracy and completeness of the reporting of obligated products supplied to the Ontario market by sampling 1 month's data and comparing the raw data sales report with the obligated product supply report. Select sample in accordance with the sample Appendix A and scrutinize the variances and validate if they're reasonable. This procedure will be the procedure I use to demonstrate how to use Appendix A when the verifier carry out this verification step. The last verification step is to select a sample in accordance with Appendix A of manual adjustments made to the product supply report and assess if they're reasonable. There are reductions to the supply report which are legitimate. So for example, we know obligated product can be supplied into Ontario at the beginning, and subsequently they're shipped out of Ontario. Therefore, they can be reduced from your total supply data. The other example, if the obligated product are qualified for many reductions, then they can also be reduced from your total supply report. And I think this is the end of the verification steps for the supply verification for data for ITT, AV, and battery. And I think it's a good point to take on any questions at this moment.
So we don't have any questions right now, but we really encourage you to ask questions for clarification even. We understand what we're reviewing right now it's pretty dense. So if you would like clarification, please feel free to ask a question now. Okay, so we received a question, is the verifier expected to complete a formal report on the verification?
I'm not sure if I understand that question correctly. And I'm gonna answer the way that I understand it. This verification step is expected to be complete by any person who is not involved in the preparing of this report and have one of destination Ryan mentioned before. I don't know the term formal reports. What does that mean? But at the end, when the registered producer of battery and ITT AV supply their supply data this year, we expected the result of what the verifier have done, have them in on the report and accompanied by the supply data to report to us this year.
I think, Jonathan, the only thing that I would add to that, just a nod to Michelle's statement that this is really dense content here, is that we're in the weeds now of the sort of technical obligations. So what I would say is that we're not looking for anything over and above what we're asking for within the procedure. So I know that there's a lot of information today. Please do take a look at the procedure that's posted. And if after that you have any questions, call into us. We're happy to answer those questions.
Thank you. So we have a question asking if someone is registered with a pro, do they still need to register with RPRA? Yes. As well as, I'll turn this into one question. If so, will an attestation report be required?
Yeah, so for a battery and ITT AV producer, the change of regulation changed to the individual producer model. So each producer who is obligated under the battery and the e-regulation are obligated to register with the regulator, with RPRA. It's a regulatory requirement. To register with a pro, you can choose any pro. It's a commercial arrangement. So register with a pro will not exempt you from register with the regulator, RPRA. For the other part of the question, attestation, I assume that is executive attestation when you supply initially your supply data, and that is required for all producer. When you submit your initial supply data, you need to submit the executive attestation to RPRA.
Thanks, Jonathan. Someone's asking if we will be able to provide a verification template
Like I just mentioned, the goal of this verification steps is to ask verifier to carry out those procedure and let us know what is the result of the verification steps. So it's hard to put a a template. This is not executive attestation. We're expecting to see the result of the procedure carried out by the verifier. So we'll not provide a template for this report.
Okay, and last question so far, and we've already answered it, but maybe let's just reiterate it again. What data do companies have to report if they're below the threshold for either ITTAV or single-use batteries?
Right. Yeah. Yes. Like I said, if you are a producer, battery producer, or ITTAV producer, if you're exempt completely from registration and reporting, this procedure would not apply to you. Those exemption again for ITTAV producer, if you're below minimum management requirement below 3.5 tons, if you're a rechargeable battery producer, if you're below the weight minimum management requirement below 1.5, or the single use between 2.5 tons of minimum requirement, and you have less than 5 employees, you're exempt from registration and reporting. So this will not apply to you. But if you're a battery producer, you do meet the weight exemption. However, you have more than 5 employees, that will make you obligated to register. So you will not be exempt from this procedure. I hope that clarified the question.
And I think that the overarching principle here is that if you're not caught by the regulation based on weights or based on definitions, then you don't have obligations to us. But if you're uncertain, the best thing to do is to reach out to the compliance team, because an officer will work with you to determine whether or not you have obligations. So this is fairly consistent with regulatory or administrative law practices in Ontario. If you're not caught by it, you don't have obligations. But if you're uncertain, please do reach out.
Thank you. So that's all the questions we're going to answer live, so we can move forward.
Thanks, Michelle. So next, we're gonna move on to the verification steps for management reductions. As a battery producer, it is allowed to reduce your supply weight if the battery producer chooses to use post-consumer content. For a ITTAV producer, it is allowed to reduce your supply weight if the ITTAV producer chooses to use post-consumer content or offer a warranty or repair option. So let's look at the battery management reduction verification step. For a battery producer who claim a post-consumer recycled content, the producer is expected to have a qualified third-party verification performed by an independent product certification organization, such as Underwriter Laboratory of Canada, Intertech, or other third-party who is qualified to provide such verification. And the third-party engineering lab is expected to include an opinion on the accuracy of the total weight of the total consumer recycled content include. Next slide, please. So the third party is expected to perform or carry out the following verification steps. Document the producer's step-by-step methodology to determine the total weight of post-consumer content claimed. Second step, conduct a review of the actual bill of materials and receipt for the specified product with recycled content. Trace and validate the weight of the recycled content in the battery to the producer, to the product supplied. Identify what type of materials are included in the post-consumer product. assess the accuracy of the post-consumer content weight in the new product for which supply is being reported. Confirm the post-consumer content was used towards the correct management reduction in the correct type of the battery. So the post-consumer content used in the single-use battery cannot be used to reduce the supply weight of rechargeable battery. The last step is to verify the total post-consumer content claim is less than 50% of the total supply weight. Next slide, please. And the following couple slides, we're going to talk about the verification step for ITTAV producer. The first one is very similar to battery program. If a ITTAV producer choose to use post-consumer content, it is allowed to reduce the weight of the post-consumer content used in the new product. And the verification procedure are almost identical to the battery programs, and the requirement is very similar. The ITTAV producer also is expected to hire a third-party qualification organization such as Underwriter Laboratory of Canada or Intertech to perform this full procedure. And I'm not going to repeat it again. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So the second management reduction available to ITTAV producer is manufacturer warranty. If an ITTAV producer offer a manufacturing warranty at no additional cost to customer 1 year after the purchase date, then the ITTAV producer is eligible to take a 5% reduction of their supply data for any full calendar year when the warranty is still in place. And the verifier is expected to complete the following 4 verification steps. First, to obtain and read the producer's corporate warranty policy. Step 2, select a sample of warranty claim in accordance with Appendix A and agree the warranty period to the producer's warranty policy. Step number 3, recalculate the producer's total warranty reduction by taking the weight of the material for which the warranty was provided and apply a 5% reduction for each full calendar year under warranty after 1 year from the date of the purchase. And the last step is select a sample of warranty claim in accordance with Appendix A and ensure the customer did not get additional charge by tracing to the replacement order. Perfect. And the last management reduction for ITTAV producer is the right to repair. If an ITTAV producer offer a right to repair option to the customer at no additional charge for tools and parts, and also offer information to show how the customer can repair their products themselves, the ITTAV producer may be eligible for a 10% reduction of their supply data. And the verifier is expected to complete the following 3 verification steps. Step 1, validate if the producer provided information to the customer at no charge regarding how to repair the product. Verification step 2, select a sample of repair order in accordance with Appendix A and document the following for each. Whether the customer was charged for tools or parts, whether information, tools, and parts are still available to the customer at the time of the producer is reporting for the supply data, and whether the producer only applied 10% reduction to the producer product category and offer a repair option. For any product type that does not have a repair order, confirm with the management for any policy or documentation to support the provision of the repair tools, parts, info to customer for free repair. And next slide. The last step is to recalculate the producer's total right to repair reduction by taking the weight of the product that provided a repair option and multiply that by 10%. So after the verifier complete the above 3 verification steps for the 3 options available to ITT-AV producer, we want the verifier to do the last verification, like the battery management reduction, to make sure that the total reduction for management reduction for ITT-AV producer, including the post-consumer content, warranty, and right to repair, is less than 50% of the total supply weight. And I think this wrapped up the verification step for the management reduction, and this is a good place to answer any questions.
We do have a question, Jonathan, just for clarification. Someone's asking if post-consumer verification is for a product or for an organization.
Yeah. So the management reductions, post-consumer verification is one of the management reduction available for ITT-AV producer or battery producer, and it is for a I think it's for both, for a producer who actually use a post-consumer content in their product, but it's particular for the type of the product that use post-consumer content. Like the example I give just now, if a battery producer use a post-consumer content in their in one category, rechargeable battery product, they can use that reduction, that option to reduce their supply weight for that category of the battery, and not for all of their product. So I think the question is, the post-consumer content is relevant for a producer and is specific for the product to actually use the post-consumer content.
Thank you. And then we're just, we have one more question asking if the verification is due at the same time as the supply data with the new June 30th date.
Yeah, we built a portal, online portal, the way that after you enter your supply weight, there is a option for you to upload that verification report along with the supply data. Yeah, so it's due at the same time.
Okay, so we don't have any more questions. Sorry, one just came in. If a producer operates an internal return and recycling program or an obligated product, could this weight qualify to be applied as a reduction?
Recycling. I think the question here is regarding the management of the obligated product. Again, there are several different ways for a producer for battery or ITT-AV to meet their minimum management requirement. They can be processed, reused, or refurbished. So if a battery or ITT-AV producer run an internal program to collect their end of life battery or ITT-AV to have them processed or refurbished or reused, all that 3 way can be used to meet their minimum management requirement. The reduction I mentioned for post-consumer content for warranty and repair, that are the option to reduce the supply weight.
Okay, we have one more question. I'm going to hold it until the end because I'm mindful we only have 10 minutes left and we have a few more slides. So let's get through those slides and then we'll continue to answer questions.
Thank you, Michelle. So the last section of this webinar is to look at the draft procedure sampling methodology. As Ryan mentioned earlier in the slide deck, that we asked a question from the participant, different level of confidence level, 90%, 95%, or 99%, and we landed on the 95% confidence level. And if we can move on to the next slide, So this is Appendix A, or the sample size chart required to complete this verification steps. As you can see, for on the left is the population size, and on the right is the sample size required. If the population is more than 500, then 60 sample is required. If the population is between 500 and 250, then 50 sample size is required, and so on and so forth. If we can move on to the next slide. I know this Appendix A sample size chart has been referenced several times in the verification steps, and based on the first phase of the consultation, I know we understand there was some confusion how to use the sample size chart and what is a population. So I would like to actually demonstrate how to use this sample size chart with one of the proposed procedure, verification step number 5. So in this procedure, the verifier is expected to select 1 month sample months and compare the raw cell data with the obligated product supply report and select sample in accordance with Appendix A on the left, and scrutinize the variances and validate if they are reasonable. So assume for the sample months selected, there are 1,000 invoices created for that month. So all those invoices can be created for obligated products, can be for non-obligated products, or for any service rendered. So can be anything. And out of that 1,000 invoice created, 900 of them actually include obligated product. And when we look at the raw sales report, the total invoice created for that month, 1,000, and the invoice actually contains the obligated product 900. We're looking at 100 invoice difference. On that 100 invoices, there are supposed to be no obligated product include. Therefore, that 100 invoice will become the population for this procedure. And if you look at Appendix A, the sample size chart, 40 sample invoices are required to be looked at for this procedure. I know this is a oversimplified example, but the idea is just to demonstrate what is a population and how to use the population chart when the verifier carry out different sample testing step in the procedure. I think this wraps up my sections, and I think it's a good time to answer any questions. I don't know if we have any.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, we have a question asking if the 60 samples, does this mean the 60 samples is the max for any population that is 500 plus? That's correct. So we work with a external consultant, and I understand if you look at the chart we present during the phase 1 of consultation, there are population over 500, but work with our external consultant, we have simplified that sample chart, and 500 is the maximum. If it's more than 500, then 60 sample size is required. Okay, and then the same person's just asking a follow-up question. Our example was per month, so they're asking if each month has to be verified.
No. So the reporting to RPRA is annually, and the verification step we ask is to select a sample month out of the annual reporting to verify that data. So you only have to do it once for one month, not for every month.
Thanks, Jonathan. And we have a few questions, but because we only have 4 minutes left, I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll follow up with those who didn't get their questions answered. So the last question will be, is third-party validation required for legacy products annually for weight management reductions? or does this only apply to new products introduced year over year?
Yeah. So when you read the regulation, the supply data need to be reported every year is historical supply data. So, for example, for this year in 2022, I believe the battery producer is for the recharge for the single-use battery, the 2021 supply data is needs to report. So it's always the historical information for the current year reporting. It's not that the new product that you supply for this year.
Thanks, Jonathan. And there is one more comment that I would like probably Ryan to address really quickly, since we have 3 minutes.
Sure.
But have we, as a regulator, contemplated that there might be instances where the cost of a third-party validator will exceed the value of weight management reductions?
I can see why these principles would be combined in the minds of some of our regulated community, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that our efforts are reasonable, and something that we know as a regulator, and no matter what sector I regulate, I can tell you that there is a cost to regulation, and I know that not every producer will have sort of internal staff that can function as the verifier. So let me say this about that. As a regulator, it's our responsibility to be reducing red tape while also reasonably enforcing our regulations, and also making sure that we provide guidance to the sector. So there may be cases when in fact the cost of achieving compliance outweighs other factors, but it would not be a reason to sort of forgive compliance or to turn a blind eye to requirements, or not actively or satisfactorily support our regulated community. I think I've left you 2 minutes, Michelle.
Thank you, Ryan. I hope that addresses that person's comment. And if not, please feel free to reach out to us. So very quickly, we will go to the next slide. And this is something we do every webinar, but we're just looking for your feedback. We will launch a poll right now. And basically, we're just looking for how your opinion on how today went. It will help us with future webinars, and we appreciate your feedback. So we'll keep this live for about 30 seconds, and then we'll move on to the next steps of the consultation. Okay, thank you to everyone who answered. So next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, great. So again, we encourage you to submit your feedback to us. We really want to hear what you have to say if you have any questions. So please submit your feedback by February 18th to consultations@rpra.ca. To review the consultation materials, including the slides that we just reviewed, please visit our current consultations webpage on our website. And we will also be setting up a follow-up email after this webinar with the recording of today's webinar, as well as the slides. And then the final procedure will be posted mid-March, and we will send out another communication once it is posted. So we're right on time. Thank you everyone for joining. And on behalf of my team, I wish you a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.